I'm Evren Gürkan Kavusoglu. I'm an assistant professor in the electrical engineering and computer science, and I'm also the faculty director for Women in Tech. And I would like to thank our panelists. They actually took their time off of their very busy schedules to be with us today, and you'll be hearing their amazing careers today. And then thank you, Zeynep, Steph, and Carmen. And I would like to invite our dean, and I would like to thank our dean to be with us today. So I would like to invite our dean, Balakrishnan, to say a few words for us. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So it's lovely to see you all here. I know this is pinned as a Women in Tech event, and obviously I'm delighted to welcome you and offer our fullest support for this. But I think of women as being underrepresented not just in tech, but in all of engineering. In fact, people ask me, why are you so enthusiastic about such an initiative? And I always talk about our first duty to a profession. It's in our best interest to attract the very best minds. And if you look at the representation of women in engineering, certainly in tech and also engineering overall, it's much, much less than 50%, which means that we're leaving so much talent on the table. So I think it behooves us to do everything in our power to bring as many great people around the table as we can. And I'm delighted that this event, Women in Tech, serves as a small first step towards that. Again, I'd like to, on behalf of the School of Engineering, offer my thanks to Craig Newmark and Newmark Philanthropies for getting this kicked off, because I see this as one small step as we continue to do other things as well. I also want to thank Evren Kavusoglu, Professor Evren Kavusoglu, for her leadership, because she's been integral in making this happen, and I'm delighted that she's here to be able to welcome you and host you. Of course, I also want to thank our panelists. I mentioned to you that I see this as one small step. The reason I say that, of course, is if we want to have more women, not only in tech, but also in engineering. But I also look at a bigger problem, which is that we don't have enough women in leadership roles, especially in the tech industry or in Fortune 500 companies. So I've actually sort of had a conversation with Evren about how, maybe we should take this as a starting point, expand it to women in engineering, but go well beyond that and talk about women in leadership positions in entrepreneurship. This is sort of along the lean-in movement that Sheryl Sandberg has been talking about. So that's my hope. Again, this is the first step. I'm looking forward to many, many more events like this. And on behalf of the School of Engineering, I offer our fullest support. And again, I thank everybody for being here, and welcome.
Thank you very much. And I will leave the stage to Ellie, who will moderate our panel. Thank you.
Hi, thank you all so much for coming today, and thank you to our panelists. We're going to start off with a pretty basic question. What is your name? Where do you work? And what is different about your job than you thought when you accepted it?
Do I have to go first? Hi, I'm Carmen Fontana. I graduated from Case with a Systems and Control Engineering degree in 2000, which makes me the old lady in this panel. And I also did the Engineering Management program in 2005. I currently work for Centric Consulting, where I lead our business practices in both emerging tech and cloud. And so what is different from my job from college? Well, those things didn't exist back then, for one thing. But, I graduated in the height of the dot-com boom, so everybody was either going to a high-flying startup or into consulting. I was pretty clueless, so I said, okay, consulting sounds good, and kind of jumped in with 2 feet, and here I am almost 20 years later.
I'm Stephanie. I'm a site reliability engineer at Google. I graduated in 2015, but I've been at Google for 3.5 years now, and so what's different about my job? It's a completely different job than I thought I would be doing. So I originally joined Google as a regular software engineer. SREs were like these production cowboys that knew how to take care of everything and was very intimidating. And it was all the stuff that I didn't like in school. I had a former manager push me to try it, and he said he thought I would like it. He's a very good manager. He was right, and it turns out all of this stuff is learnable. So I learned it, and that's what I do now, and I really enjoy it.
Hi, my name is Zeynep Ersonomay. I graduated CASE 2011 with a PhD degree in computer science. Then I moved on for my postgraduate studies to Yale School of Medicine, where I'm still working as a research scientist. So what is different about my job than what I expected or imagined? So I've been working on bioinformatics and systems biology starting from my undergrad, master's, and PhD. So I knew I would be in an interdisciplinary environment. But as you get more involved, it basically turns into a highly interdisciplinary environment where you have to interact with people from medicine day to day. So most of my job is basically explaining what I do, and what I do is very useful for people in medicine. So besides the technical part, communicating what I do became very essential. So that's one of the things that's very different than what I imagined.
So it sounds like you all solve different kinds of problems at work. So what is your favorite technical challenge that you have solved?
You're not going to go first, please? No. Okay. I think the most interesting thing for me, so when I moved into site reliability, it's a lot more on how systems work at scale. And my on-team mentor, his name was Dave, was great, and then Dave had the nerve to move away. And so I was, named the technical lead after that, and I had no idea what I was doing. So I think the biggest technical challenge for me was, being able to learn those systems and start managing people or projects to the ability where, it didn't fall down. I was suddenly responsible for this part of Google. It was very intimidating, but I felt well supported throughout it the whole time. And like I said, it's all learnable, but I'm most proud of being able to pull that together.
For me, I'm heavily involved in our artificial intelligence, particularly machine learning competencies. And the technical stuff is certainly challenging and interesting, but where the real challenge we're finding is how do you apply these to business problems? How do you take the cool technology and actually solve real-world problems with that? So that is a challenge in itself, but then with AI, you've got an additional layer of the technology is probably ahead of where we are from an ethics, policy, process standpoint. So figuring out how do we don't just go with the gee-whiz technology without being mindful of the human impact. And so that's been a really interesting challenge for us. An example is we're working on models to help predict when employees are going to leave an organization, because that's a huge cost sunk for them. But it's also a little creepy if your employer says, you know what, Carmen, I think you're going to leave in 3 months, right? So how do we manage the model and implement the model that's mindful of the human element?
It's interesting when I was thinking about this question, going back years, and I realized when you overcome the challenges, they don't look like as challenging. So I work in genomics, and the amount of data produced in genomics has skyrocketed, and it's exponentially growing. And we can produce data, we can produce cheap data, but analyzing that data and extracting useful information from data is really challenging. And now one important aspect of it is sharing data. If everyone produces their own data in their closed environment and doesn't share, it's not really useful. So people are starting to share their data, but the challenge there is integrating that data. Quality control, production of high quality data analysis is really challenging. But once you overcome those steps, when you see a pattern in multiple omics data, that could potentially be useful for a patient or a group of patients. That's an amazing thing.
To follow up on that, Steph, you've been talking a lot about kind of broadly what you do, but what specifically is a site reliability engineer at Google do?
Good question. My whole job is to make things breakless. So the only thing that I work on that I mostly work on internal infrastructure, so everything that helps keep other things running. So you will hopefully never see my name in the news for breaking something, but if you apply to Google, I help keep that site up so please keep doing that. But yeah, a lot of it is making plans. When we're in the early stages of design, I have to be the one that's a bit of the pessimist and anxious, like how could this fail? What's the worst thing that can happen and what are we going to do to make sure that doesn't happen? You can't anticipate everything, but SRE's SRE's motto is that hope is not a strategy. So if an engineer brings me a design and says, oh, it'll be fine, it's my job to tell them, please assume it will not be fine. And so we work with engineers to make sure that they are designing for this scale. Even the small numbers at Google are big, and it really doesn't take a whole lot for for an engineer to miss something, and that's why we work together as a team with software engineers. So my job is mainly to plan for the worst and then fix it for the best.
And you mentioned getting promoted to technical lead. So how did your job change from when you were working for that manager and then you got promoted to technical lead? Like, what were the challenges there?
I had a lot more meetings, and I think the biggest thing was, I went from somebody that was being handed projects that I had to implement to being the person that was coming up with the projects, what should we do next? And it can be a little intimidating when people are like, oh, well, what do we do? And you're like, oh, crap, I'm supposed to have the answer now. So I think that was a big change for me. And then just having the confidence to know that I actually did know what I was talking about and I could carry this kind of work through.
And then Carmen, you are in consulting, and that is kind of a field that I know I didn't necessarily think about as a computer science major. So can you describe exactly what you do as a consultant?
Yeah, so the consulting career, you'll be surprised how many engineers are actually in consulting, because what we do is solve our clients' problems. They come to us, if the problems were easy, they wouldn't pay us to do them. And so consultant's life, the good and the bad is every day is a puzzle, and every 6 months or so, it changes. You've got a brand new puzzle you have to solve. And so there is quite a bit of technology consulting, doing pure technology consulting like I'm in with cloud and emerging tech. But my colleagues have engineering degrees on the business side as well, because they find that being able to solve kind of more pure business problems, that problem-solving skills is really important.
And then you got a master's in engineering management from Case, correct? And so you are currently a lead for a lead for Centric Consulting. So how did that help you transition to that position, and what did that look like?
Yeah, so out of college, I went and worked for a different consulting firm, Accenture. Started out as a software developer and then moved into different companies, different roles as a technical project manager. Loved that type of work, loved being technical, but I also really was intrigued by the business side, but definitely didn't feel comfortable that I could go square to square with some of the business majors. So the MEM program was really appealing to me because I wanted to advance my technical knowledge in computer engineering, but I also wanted to understand how a balance sheet worked and how to manage teams effectively and things of that nature. So it's been a really good prep for where I land today, because I do probably about a third of my time is business development, marketing, helping grow my business lines. About a third is team management, so anything from coaching and mentoring to the financial operations of my practices. And then the third is more technical delivery.
And then finally, Zainab, sorry, I ignored you for a bit over there. How did you decide to take the jump and go into a PhD program?
It wasn't quite a jump. I sort of realized that I enjoyed research during the fourth year in college, but then I go ahead and did a master's degree. So it's a good 2-year test to see if you really enjoy research. And I did. So you really don't have to do a master's degree for a PhD, but it worked for me. It was a really good test period. I enjoyed it. I solidified my interests more, and it was a good investment for me.
And then what exactly is the field of bioinformatics?
Bioinformatics is actually very broad, and it's getting broader and broader. So basically, biology is a systems, and then you have to approach it with a computer science approach to really efficiently analyze the data. It could be in the genomics level, it could be in the cellular level, it could be in the systems level. So there's various kinds of levels of data. You can communicate these different levels of data, integrate the data and produce some results, or you can just basically work on that sub-level and use it benefit of the human end, actually. Yep.
So kind of talking about education, what was the most valuable thing you gained during your time in college?
Well, college and PhD program, I should say. First of all, I think teamwork, especially towards the end of those 4 years, you start doing group projects. And I really enjoyed it and saw the value of it. Besides your personal skills, working in a group and producing something together was very valuable, and that's something that I learned, I think was very important. The other thing during PhD is basically everybody now, like when you're approaching a problem, everybody says you have to think out of a box. But I think PhD program gives you a box first. And this is not my quote, I wish it was mine, but I think it's 2016 Economy Nobel Prize winner said this. So I think that's what PhD gives, especially for the first couple of years. You're really learning how to think. That's one of the most valuable things I think I got from PhD.
Do you have your answer?
I participated in the co-op program, so I did the graduate in 5 years thing, and I think that was the best move that I made. Classes were great. I genuinely love school and love learning, but getting to work at companies for a little longer than an internship let me see what I liked and what I didn't like, and it really helped me choose later what I wanted to try next. So I worked at big companies like Philips Healthcare and also like smaller startup companies like Explorus and MIM Software. And it was great to me to, even though I was young, that for them to give me those opportunities. And I was allowed to fail and I was allowed to try and learn and get better. And that was the whole point. And I really appreciate those companies like taking that time to invest in me, because it very much influenced what I studied and the jobs that I applied for later.
And for me, the stuff I learned, the technologies and the software and that sort of thing, they're not relevant now, as it will be for you guys, and maybe even in short time frame as 2 or 3 years. But what is still relevant is the problem solving. To be able to take an ambiguous problem where there's data that might be important, might not be important, all these different threads, and kind of figure out what's my first step, what's my second step, how do I add additional information. That is just a great foundation for whatever career you take it.
Why should universities prioritize women in tech, and how do they continue this strive to get more women involved in tech?
From a pure business standpoint, my job is to build a practice, and so I have to hire people to do that delivery. I can't hire enough people. There's not enough qualified people out there. So for me, it's a pure numbers thing, right? If there's not enough women, let's get more women doing this so we have more people to hire in general. But the studies also show that diverse teams outperform non-diverse teams left and right. So as a team lead, I want to have the best performing team I can have. So that means I want to make sure I hired a diverse team, because I know that's a proven formula for success. So that's, I think universities are the incubator for the workforce.
Strong agree. If you believe that talent is equally distributed, as I do, then you're missing out on so much by excluding, or in some cases purposely pushing these kind of people out. As far as what universities can do, I'm amazed to see this right now. This was not around when I was a student. I'd love to see more professors get to know their students and default to encouragement. I know when I first joined, the CS department and tried to go out on co-op, I was told no one would ever hire me. And I really wish that had like not been my initial attitude from a professor. I'm glad that I stuck with it. I found lots of professors that were supportive, and that was never a problem again. But as a first impression, it was rather jarring. I think making good first impressions and then following up and continuing to encourage those students, doesn't matter who you are, adds up and goes a long way.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. If we are after smart people, we should equally use the resources. And in terms of what universities should do, I was looking into like some numbers in my current institution in terms of leadership, because all of the universities nowadays are trying to hire female students. But what I observe is lacking in leadership in academia mostly. So I just looked into some numbers. For instance, at my current institution, total faculty by gender distribution is interesting. 50% of School of Art is female. Law school is 43% female. Engineering is only 20%, and it's the lowest number. Architecture is 31%, and there are a total of 11 schools. And if you go into the more leadership-wise, deans by gender, for instance, in my current institution, they collected numbers starting from 83. It was 8% of the deans were female in 83. Now 47% of the deans are female. But when you look into the department chairs, you see actually this number is not strongly represented. Engineering schools have 20% of them only are department chairs are only females. Public health 40%. Medicine is 11%. This is even more striking. So I think it is great that schools are trying to get more female students into engineering, but if we don't have equal representation in the leadership, I think the chain would be broken there. So I think that's one of the things that schools should also put on.
How do you maintain a good work-life balance?
Well, balance is fake. The thing I want to emphasize is you're not going to have work-life balance perfectly level your entire life. There'll be times some things are more important than others. Drawing from my personal history, when I was 30 years old, it was kind of an upward trajectory of my career, go get them, right? I had an infant and I had a toddler, but I was going to do it all, right? And then out of the blue, I was diagnosed with bone cancer, right? So what do you do when you have a toddler, a baby, and bone cancer, and something's got to give, right? And so at that time, I took steps to kind of take the foot off the accelerator with my career because I had to. There was no other choice. Something had to give, right? So I had to focus on myself and my family at that period in time. And, it was hard. It was a choice I had to make, right? But you're also thinking, oh, how's this going to damage my career long term? But what I found was, everybody gets healthy, the kids grow up, now I have time to focus back on my career. My career is accelerating again. I'm the youngest business line lead in our company. Because of those times I've had to make those choices in balance, you learn things. They might not be career things, but I learned how to be hyper-focused on a certain thing during that time in my life. And I also learned how to set goals and that sort of thing. So you're not going to have perfect balance the entirety of your life, but you just want to have balance, at the moment in time, you want to balance the things that are most important.
I wish I could tell everyone Carmen's answer. She's exactly right. I don't have children or anything like that, but the one thing I did find difficult is, in college, there was always another deadline coming. I felt like I had to be on all the time. And then when I was switching to work, where I really was allowed to stop after 40 hours a week, I actually didn't know how to do that. I just felt like I had to be working all the time. It also wasn't healthy in school either, so don't do that now if you can avoid it. But it did take some time that I was allowed to have hobbies now. I started playing soccer and going hiking and making time for other things that I enjoyed. And so as you make that transition, just keep in mind, it is a shift, and you might actually have to make an effort to stop, and I encourage you to do so.
Well, it's a tough question, and I personally don't think that I'm in a position to give advice on that, but what I keep trying to force myself is basically when I'm doing work, just focus on work. If I'm with my family, just don't stop thinking about work. I know it's really hard, but I'm trying to basically optimize the time that I'm spending for my work or spending with my family. Quality time with my family would be interrupted by constantly thinking in the background with work. Or you won't be as efficient and as productive in work if you're constantly thinking about work. It is hard. I don't say I'm achieving this, but this is what I'm trying to do. But
the one thing I will point out that tech careers are actually one of the best careers for somebody who wants work-life balance. You're going to work hard. A lot of times you're going to work long hours. I certainly do. But you'll find the employers in the tech sector are some of the most flexible. I've worked from home for the last 7 years. I'm there when I get my kids on the bus. I'm there when my kids come home. I have unlimited vacation time. I mean, Google, I know, has a great maternity policy, so does Netflix. This sector is actually really great for working women.
Yeah, and I will say as an SRE, I'm on call every once in a while, and so once every 6 weeks, from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., I am responsible for if something breaks. I'm the one that gets called, and that can be very stressful. But the thing that I like about Google, so at 9 p.m., I put the pager down, Munich wakes up and takes over. And then the other thing that they do is you get paid for on-call. So I can take that time as money or vacation. I frequently try to take the vacation. I love my job. I also love not being at my job sometimes. And so that is one of those benefits that the longer I've been in SRE, I've learned not all companies offer, and something I hope I never take for granted. But I mean, this is one of the privileges you have in the tech industry, is to take advantage of these things. Yeah. So,
and the other thing, and I'm just going to be frank with it, tech industry pays well, and that allows you to have some comfort, especially when you're balancing children. You can pay for good quality daycare, which I can't emphasize enough. You can pay for somebody to deliver your groceries. I pay for somebody to clean my house. I'm going to be totally frank. I don't do it all. I pay somebody to do that. And that's another benefit of the tech sector, that it is allows you to have that flexibility.
So outside of tech, what are good skills to have when you're entering the work industry, or even as you're trying to develop into a leader?
I will emphasize communication skills, because unfortunately, if you're best at your job, if you're the best coder, if you solve the best problems, if you cannot communicate what you have done to your boss or to your client or to your grant reviewers, you're not going to take the next step. So I think communicating in simple terms and communicating within tech and outside tech is very essential, I believe.
My community organizing, I did a lot of that on campus. That directly translates to my job, especially now that I'm managing projects and people and knowing what's going on. And then I would give a strong +1 to learning how to advocate for yourself and communicate your work. When I got to Google, I got a mentor. Her name is Simone, and she sat me down and was like, "Okay, you're writing design docs, right? Right? Okay. How else are you keeping track of your work? When are you telling your manager when you do a good job? Do you know that you're doing a good job?" And so I do really recommend finding a more senior woman that can kick your butt in that direction and make sure that you are doing that and speaking up. I owe so much of what I've gotten to do at Google to her pushing me on that.
I'd echo everything they said. I'd say the other thing is, even if you don't want to take a business direction with your career, understanding how your business works. How does your company make money? Because when you know those things, then you can make sure you're positioning yourself to be most beneficial for your company, which will help your career in the long run.
And talking about kind of making that decision, how did you make the decision to go into consulting versus into kind of a more software developer or academia field?
Yeah, so I feel like I kind of got the best of both worlds. Like I said, it was a crazy time in the late 90s. Every company, the Twing Center was full of companies interviewing here. So you had your pick, right? What I liked about consulting was I didn't have to make a choice. I could do, as a consultant, you can go try something for 6 months, then go do something else. But I could still remain very technical. My first job was writing Unix shell scripts. And so I was still very, very technical. But when that project got over and that writing Unix shell scripts sucked, I knew I could go to a different project that was going to be cooler. And so that variety was really attractive to me.
And then Zainab, what is it like? Because I'm assuming you interact with a lot of people in the medical field in your work. So how do you interact with them and communicate with them on, because you definitely have a degree in CS where they are experts in medicine.
Well, it's very challenging. For the last 2 or 3 years, I've been involved in a project where basically we analyze every brain tumor that is resected at our institution, and I perform genomic analysis on those. And then every Friday there is a multidisciplinary board, tumor board, that every patient is discussed. So I started attending those meetings. At first, it was horrifying because for one thing, I wasn't really following the logic there. Medicine totally runs on a different logic system. But the other thing is I learned how to communicate my findings very quickly and to the point. The aim in that meeting is basically what is your result and can that be useful for this patient's treatment. Sometimes we technical people I think are so consumed about the process we forget what it is useful for. So it took me quite a while to communicate those really quickly and to the point, but and I'm still learning.
So heads up to our audience, we're going to have time for audience questions and a question or two. So prepare those and get ready to ask questions. So how do we as students prepare for a career that does not exist today?
Yeah, so my career didn't exist in 1999. No, it's, get out there, learn the fundamentals. Some things are exactly the same. Machine learning is linear regression with a lot more computing juice behind it. Those kind of things are fundamental no matter where the technology goes. But I'd also encourage you to make sure that you're not fully focused on the technology. Take some humanities classes. I think we're seeing a really big diversion between technology and humanity, and I think we need to make sure we bring it back together. So that would be one thing I would encourage you to do, is not to be too heads down, because the future is up there.
Yeah. My job did exist, but it was something that I had never considered, and so I would say just be open to things. Don't let whatever is next intimidate you. It's all learnable, so you can do it.
I mean, I totally agree with both of these comments. It's adaptability, basically learn to learn and be adaptable as much as possible, because most of the jobs today are going to be obsolete in probably 10 years.
Yeah, you have to like learning to stay in computers. So if you don't like learning, we should talk. But,
Being a lifelong learner, I think, is truly the key to having a successful technology career, because it's going to change every 6 months, every 9 months.
And what mediums do y'all use to learn about what's up and coming and what's coming next in the field?
There's a lot of good stuff now. And it's free or cheap. Microsoft had a professional program in artificial intelligence. I did that. It was like a 6-month program. I just did it all online. There's so many things with Coursera and edX to stay on. But even just reading articles and, Twitter is a great way just to get one-liners on what's happening. It is important to stay on it. It's a job in itself sometimes, but I think those are the important ways to do it.
Yeah, a strong +1 to Twitter. I started following a ton of women on Twitter when I was here as a student and didn't feel like I had the women community in tech, and I learned so much just like scrolling between classes and reading some of those articles. And then, I take advantage of a lot of what Google is going to offer me in terms of training. So, companies do have an incentive for you to keep current and to keep learning. So, again, if you have time for those opportunities, or you should make time, don't be afraid to take advantage of them. Google's investment in me has given me a career that I really enjoy, and I'm really grateful that somebody took the time to put in that work to make it available. So don't waste it.
Yeah, I agree. Social media is a great way to easily identify common interests. In my area, the very interesting paper is probably being tweeted frequently, so it's the easy way instead of getting all the way updates Twitter is a good way to go. Meetings, exchanging ideas within institution or outside institution, just catching up with people. Close door. If you just close your door and do your thing, unfortunately, things don't go far.
So now we're going to go ahead and take audience questions. I believe there's a microphone somewhere. Were those?
Who's going to be the first?
Oh, okay. Yeah. This might not be as technical as the rest of the questions that have been asked, but how relevant is LinkedIn? I feel like it's been pushed on me constantly, and there's a really different atmosphere around older people who use it and younger people who use it, and I'm just interested in knowing.
I can't wait to hear their opinions.
I worked in the co-op office. It was probably my job to get a bunch of you to create LinkedIn. So I actually do find it useful. When I was a senior, I was trying to get a job in many different cities to try to move with my then fiance. And honestly, having my network somewhere where I could go and ask people for referrals or if they could give recommendations, things like that, that went a long way. Where I see it now is LinkedIn is more of a long game. So, I have coworkers that, move on to different companies, things like that. And it is a good way, to keep in touch. I probably won't be at Google forever. It would be nice to, have those people available to me when I'm ready for whatever is next. And then just, is Elizabeth here? Fregoso? No? Okay, good. I'm glad she stayed home. But just as an example, she is a student that literally cold messaged me on LinkedIn 4 years ago to ask for help on learning how to code. And we have just become friends. I'm happy to write her referrals. That was super bold of her and something that really left an impression on me. And so now, that was how we got to know each other. So there is value in it. I do admit it is different from other social media networks, but I would say stick with it.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, in academia, it's not really that relevant, but it's useful if you change your mind about academia and if you want to switch gears, then it's always good to have connections there, I guess. But academicians don't really use that.
I'd echo what Stephanie said. It's kind of a necessary evil. It's not my favorite social media platform. I don't wake up and say, "Can't wait to see what's on LinkedIn." But it's the modern day Rolodex. So it's how you kind of track people throughout your career. So I actually do use it quite a bit for business development. Sharing I'm going to be at this event. People reached out to me. Blah blah blah. It's a great conversation starter. Twitter's way more fun. So.
Hi. So do any of you feel that any of your experiences in the workplace have been shaped by the fact that you're a woman? And how do you deal with any challenges that might come to you that you might face that maybe your male counterparts don't?
The whole reason I'm in SRE is because I was trying to get off of a team that I felt was treating me poorly, partly due because I was a woman, partly because I think they were looking for somebody to sort of gang up on. So for sure, I will say overwhelmingly I've met more people that are positive and supportive than those that aren't. But unfortunately, the answer is yes. I think the best thing that you can do is look for supportive managers and supportive teammates, and don't be afraid to fire your boss. So if you have somebody that's not working out, or if you have a team conflict that you either can't resolve on your own or you can't get help from your manager, cool, it's time to pick a new job. And that was the best thing that I did. Like I said, in this case, it pushed me to do something I was definitely afraid of before. But I never give those people credit for my success now. You succeed in spite of those people, not because of. And you succeed because of the people that are there and supporting you. And so try to focus on those people rather than the others.
Yeah, it's tough. I'd say that one of the most refreshing things in my entire career is seeing the seismic change that's happened in the last 2 to 3 years. When I started, it was not uncommon for me to be the only woman on the team. I had grad classes where I was the only woman in the class. And it was a layer of video game geeks. I don't play video games. I don't like Star Trek. I'm not into any of that geeky stuff. And so I really felt isolated, and it has become such a more inclusive environment as of recent. We still got tons of way to go. But I feel like that really has propelled me and given me more confidence. You know, I've always had imposter syndrome because I didn't like Star Trek and didn't get the good jokes. And now I feel like, you know what, I know artificial intelligence just as well as these people do. Stitch Fix, which some of you might know, is my very favorite technology firm. I always bring it up because it's a clothing company run by artificial intelligence. There's nothing geeky about it. It's, you know, and that is kind of a great story of how diversity applied with technology has created a completely new industry.
I agree. I mean, things are moving for the better. They're like great improvements, even we see within our lifetime. But there will be a bad experience. Basically, just hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Basically, going in every meeting, there will be something, possibly unintentionally, but there will be something. So it's best to be prepared for that and not to be discouraged by that, I think.
And then just a follow-up. So then how to just like in day-to-day life, how do you feel that like we as students could work? You say we're moving towards a better place. How do we continue that as students in ECS?
Support each other, signal boost everybody's work, do practice interviews with each other, help people network. Like the best thing that you can do is lift each other up as you keep going. Like even a couple of years out of school, like you still have more experience in the group coming behind you. Like you always have something to offer, and so don't be afraid to do that.
And I want to thank the men that showed up today. It is really important for women to have advocates. It shows in your career. If you have a sponsor, you're going to go far. But there's just not enough women around to be sponsors for all the women. So men have to be sponsors too. And so doing things like just showing up really does help elevate women's careers.
I was wondering how you deal with questions from managers and SVPs regarding where your loyalties lie with regard to if they lie with family and significant others or if they lie with the company.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had a question asked outright. The one thing, which once again is getting better, is I've always had to remind people that I don't have a wife that takes care of everything like they do. As some of my colleagues had, stay-at-home wives who took care of the children and the house and the cleaning, and so they could do the happy hours after work and do this. And my husband worked too, so we had to find a balance for that. And so, that was something that I've kind of had to remind some of my male colleagues, especially the older ones.
I will say loyalty to me is typically a red flag. Loyalty doesn't pay bills. You have a life. There's more to, more to your life than your career. I have felt manipulated by people before, like, oh, well, you should stay because I helped you do this and that. And like, yeah, but like everything else is sort of a garbage fire. So loyalty is not enough reason to stay. So you are the one that is going to set the tone for it. And like I said, don't be afraid to fire your manager. There are other opportunities right now. Tech is hiring like crazy. You do have the advantage of being able to jump if you need to.
I've never had like explicitly being asked that. Partially probably academia, it's different, but you always have bosses. So either your collaborator or your department chair, but there are rules. So there's rule for maternity leave. You are entitled to take all of that, or there are weekends which are yours. So I think it's a matter of how strongly, firmly you sit at your position.
So something I've been hearing a lot about and people have been talking a lot about is women in tech getting pushed into roles, sort of like, oh, the person who takes notes at the meeting, they just assume that you'll be the one who does that. And obviously the best way to avoid that is to like not fall into those roles. But how do you sort of, I guess, navigate getting around that or trying to get out of that position if you've gotten into that position and try to sort of move away from being pushed into roles like that?
I laugh because I don't want to count how many times I've been asked to be the note taker. There's studies that show that women are the housekeepers of the office, where we're the ones that take the notes and pick up the donuts and things of that nature. I have found that demurring in that moment and then educating after the moment works. So, I was asked fairly recently to take notes in a meeting, and I said, you know what, I'm not a great note taker. It might be better somebody else does. That way I can fully focus and make sure I can interact with the client as needed. So that way it wasn't blowing up in the middle of the meeting in front of a client. And then afterwards, educating the person that did that, why is this an issue? I provided some links to articles. The person was actually very appreciative of it. They didn't know. Part of this is an education process. It's unfortunate that we're the ones who have to educate, but it is the reality of the situation. And that person at another meeting said, I just want you to know, I purposely made sure that I wasn't disproportionately asking women to take the notes because of the conversation we had, Carmen. And I think that is shows, hey, you can get out of the situation gracefully, but follow up with that education component.
Yeah, I do think that education is important when you have the energy for it. Another thing that I was taught, especially when I was on that team where maybe I was not really respected, was to take the marker on the whiteboard and lead the meeting instead, and then take notes that way. And that way, it was more being in front and in charge. The team I'm on now is much healthier. I love the team I'm on now, and a practice that they have that I've really enjoyed. We pick meeting runners. So at the end of the next meeting, you pick the next meeting runner. And SRE is more men than even software engineering is, but I have a great group of guys that has learned they need to do their share. Another thing I was taught is if they're asking for volunteers to plan something or grab the donuts or whatever, try to wait 5 more seconds than is comfortable for you. Typically, and then somebody else will speak up. If it's something you really feel needs done, don't be afraid to do it anyway, but watch how much you're doing it. And sometimes that extra pause is all that the rest of the room needs to find somebody different.
I agree. We just have to be strong in our stance and understand that certain actions are probably not thought through. That's why probably educating and warning and explaining is very important. At the end of the day, the reasons don't matter. Intentional and unintentionally thought through, not thought through. They have the similar impact. So that's why we have to basically behave similarly for every type of inappropriate question or request.
Hi. So I was wondering, how do you know that you're getting paid fairly? And also, how do you know, or I guess, how do you balance not breaching anyone's boundaries, like their personal information, but also advocating for yourself in your team environment?
It's hard. I'll be the first one to admit that I left a lot of money on the table over the years, a lot. Part of it because I just wasn't educated. Part of it there is some, true reasons. Women ask for money. It looks different. It comes across different than when men do, that sort of thing. But I wasn't educated. There is tools now. Use Glassdoor. Use other tools. PayScale's another great one. But ask women colleagues. And I am finding more and more women will share what they make because they also are in the same boat where they feel like, you know what, I don't think I'm paid right. I had a colleague recently, she was a level ahead of me in her career, and she said, Carmen, I want you to know how much I make because women don't share. And she gave me everything. Here's my base, here's my bonus, here's my profit share, etc. And she said, and it was really helpful because I was getting ready to ask for a raise, and I knew based on the intel she gave me where I needed to be.
Yeah. Men in the room, sharing your pay stubs, the biggest thing. I actually did take a lower offer at Google to get in my foot in the door the first year. It was made up for later, but at the time I didn't know that. And one of my friends that I went to school with, he was over at my apartment, and he was just like, he was like, yeah, my number's like almost twice as high as yours when you take like total comp. And that was a huge shock to me. Like I said, like that's since been rectified, but I had never thought to ask. And, right before I left for Google, I had been working at Explorus for 2.5 years. I had never received a raise while I was there, and they brought in new interns, and I found out they're actually given housing stipends to the new interns. So actually the intern that I was managing my final summer was technically making more than me. And I did not find out till about 6 weeks before I left the company there wasn't anything I could do, but I promised not to make that mistake again. And so I always share my pay stubs now. You can read, Erica Baker started a share my salary spreadsheet at Google. And that's why I know I'm fairly paid now, because the men that I work with submit their numbers and are willing to show me their pay stubs. And so that's how it gets better. But yes, you might leave money on the table. Don't learn how to negotiate. That's the biggest thing you can do. Grab a book, attend a seminar, podcast, whatever your jam is. It's the biggest skill that you can have. You won't just use negotiation and pay. You negotiate things at your job all the time. So if the idea of learning to negotiate pay is awkward for you, try to frame it to yourself that way. It's a skill worth having, in actual dollars worth money.
And I think social media is important there. More and more groups geared towards that discussion is opening up. Again, in academia, there are groups that discuss their startup packages. It might not be as always a salary, but basically you're starting a new career, and your startup package determines how your next 6 years is going to be built on, so it's very important. Discussing those is very important, and how to basically negotiate them. Everyone says just go shop more, go have an alternative offer. Those kind of things, those tricks, you don't know if you don't talk to people, so basically talking.
The counter offer is big too. Seniors, I know that interviewing is exhausting, and sometimes you get that first offer and you just want to be done so bad. Please try to go get that other offer. It's okay if one doesn't appear, but you will be doing yourself a huge favor, even just with practicing negotiating. If you don't get any extra money, fine. You have a little more negotiation skill for your next time that you're going to be doing that, so it's worth it.
My question was about mentors. I know that some internships, some co-ops have assigned mentors, but that's always kind of a little awkward. You guys talk about mentors as this really concrete thing, and I know that I personally and a lot of us in the room have mentors that were oh, that person is a mentor to me, but it's not a really formalized thing. How do you identify a mentor, and rather than just oh, this person is a person that I take information from? Do you know what I mean?
So the mentor I mentioned earlier, she actually was assigned to me through a formal program, and I had done a lot of mentoring in school, and then it was at the point where yeah, I need somebody now. That program was structured through Google, and they laid out the curriculum, and it was amazing. So if you get those structured opportunities, take advantage of them. So I think the thing that worked well there was we had topic lists for each week that we met, and so the pressure wasn't on me. I think especially when you're new to your career, you don't know what to ask yet. You don't know what you don't know. There is a trend that the mentee should be setting the relationship, and while I largely agree with that, it is a bit on your mentor too, to make you feel comfortable in asking questions. And one thing I see a lot with recent grads is they feel if they're not talking about technical stuff or career stuff during their mentor conversations, that it's a waste of time. There is a lot of value in just getting lunch with whoever your mentor is and talking about your favorite cookie to bake, or your soccer game, or things you enjoy, because that is what helps establish rapport, so that when you do have something that you really need to talk to them about, you already feel comfortable with them. So I would say that's never a waste of time, and I see a lot of recent students tend to worry about that. Getting to know the women in your network, or not even necessarily women, that adds up. So don't feel every second has to be super productive.
And
everything Steph said, but the other thing I'd say is you don't need somebody 5 steps on the ladder ahead of you. Sometimes you're going to have the most productive mentor-mentees with somebody who's just 1 or 2 steps, because their experience is going to be more close to what you'll be seeing in the near future.
In my case, my PhD advisor is a lifelong advisor. He's still, whenever I have work-related, research-related problem, he's the first one that I call. So it's very important to have that trust. And again, at your work, your collaborator could be your mentor. It doesn't have to be a really senior person. And as Carmen said, it's sometimes more relevant to have someone closer to your experience. So.
So how would you encourage women coming into college to stay in the tech field when they might be discouraged by the numbers of how many men are in the tech field, or just a mentor above them saying, like how Stephanie was saying about a professor discouraging her? So how would you encourage women to stay with it throughout college, or just coming in as an opportunity for them to follow through with?
Well, I think especially at this age, that's not relevant. Maybe years ago that comment might somehow sink into someone's mind, but at this age, a person who made to college has enough intelligence to see that's not a suggestion, that's not a valid explanation to take it. Just don't listen to it. I mean, it's not relevant at this age. It never was, but it's not relevant. It's just disregard.
I would encourage you to not listen to people that are saying things like that. But as far as some of that stuff can still really sting if you do come in contact with it. And my advice is to find people that are supportive. Like I said, that was one professor. The rest were overwhelmingly supportive. And I still get phone calls sometimes of students that run into similar things. But what's important is to have your community, like whether that's professors that you know or other students. And there's no one single rule to anything. So I had a student get told she'd never get hired because she got a C in a class. I got a C in networks and Calc 3, vector calc, I think is whatever that's called. See, I don't really need it. But you compensate for that. There's no single golden rule. I try to keep saying all of this is learnable. It's not limited to a classroom. If you fail a class, you are still allowed to go relearn that and try again. The same is true for industry. So if someone's trying to lay something down as a hard and fast rule, it's when you know not to listen to them.
Find your tribe, for sure. Find your tribe.
Yeah, sort of similar to that question. How do you realize when you're not being treated well, or how do you realize that your worth is more than it's being perceived? Because when a manager or someone is telling you oh, you're not doing good enough, and you're staying late nights, or you're putting in the extra effort, and you're still being told that, it's hard to know whether they're right or whether you just suck at your job.
Well, for one thing, that's not a constructive comment. If there's really wrong with what you're doing, it should be pointed properly. Putting extra hours is usually not going to solve any problem. If there's a problem, it should be pointed out clearly in a systematic way. So what is the problem, what can be improved, and how it can be improved. If these things are not addressed, that is probably not a professional comment, but rather a personal comment.
The book, I was recommended a book by a manager in the Chrome team called Thanks for the Feedback, especially when I was having a hard time getting over this team that I felt had not treated me very well. And the book is all about knowing when to sort out feedback even when it doesn't really feel fair or nice. And that way you can pick out what's useful for it, and then when you identify garbage, you can leave it in the garbage. But it's a skill and it takes practice. So sometimes there is some stuff that you need to hear that is hard, and you can practice getting better at that. But it doesn't happen overnight, but it is a skill you can work on. And yes, sometimes you just need to know when to not listen to people.
Yep. Yeah, and it's helpful when not listening to them. Be aware for coded language in your feedback. Sharp elbows. Women always have sharp elbows. I've never met a man with sharp elbows. I don't get it. Those are kind of things. Not outgoing enough. Women get that a lot. I don't know. Men are allowed to be quiet programmers who don't talk to anybody, but women, we have to be the socialite of the office, right? So be careful of those things. And if you do get feedback, push back on that. Why do I have to be the social butterfly of the office? I speak up in meetings, I do this. Is my lack of socialness impacting the team? And sometimes when you pry, you'll get an understanding. Either they were bad at giving you good feedback, or they're just bad at giving feedback. And there's a difference.
We have time for like one or two more questions.
Hi. So each of you throughout this session has mentioned something or another about, so in your work-life balance, not being able to go to happy hour or not necessarily relating to the interests of the majority that you're surrounded by, and building those social, and also how building social relationships with your peers at work is important. So have those hurdles that you've experienced in having to do the family stuff as well, or not relating in all of your interests, has that affected your career? And if so, how have you addressed it? How have you addressed being able to relate to the people around you?
Yeah, I mean, there is, there's a lot of times people just get in a pattern of behavior. Well, we're going to talk about football for the first 15 minutes of our status call, or we're going to always go out to happy hour on Thursday night. And a lot of times we just interrupt that pattern behavior to make sure it's inclusive. And it's not just a gender thing. It's also an age thing. And there's also an ethnicity thing when you get into those patterns of behavior of the majority. And so sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes it's on us to suggest, hey, instead of doing happy hour, why don't we do a community service event on Saturday? Or how about, instead of talking about football, we talk about the news, or, which might be more controversial, I don't know. Find a different topic, but, something different than football to talk about, right? And so interjecting, changing up the pattern, and a lot of times people are appreciative of it because they're tired of the same old thing too.
Yeah, I think offering suggestions is normally a good thing. So one thing that's been trending within SRE is, instead of like alcohol or whiskey being the thing, like tea instead. And when I got to SRE, I was very confused why all the women were drinking all this tea all this time. And now, I also love tea, so it wears off on you. But it's such a common thing that you could bond over that. You didn't have to worry about people not drinking alcohol or not wanting to, or not wanting to reveal they were pregnant or things like that. And you could still just socialize with somebody. And so I think when you offer those concrete alternatives rather than just, by all means, call things out when they're not inclusive, but it does help to give an alternative that is easy to say yes to. So.
It's just making sure that everyone understands that pattern, as Carmel said, is not as inclusive as they're hoping. They might not know. They might think that you're just not choosing to go. So just first make sure, again, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. So hope that they are not aware, and then make them sure that they are aware that there are other options.
When you're in the point where you're a manager someday, keep that in mind. Change up the activities your team does. Community service, sporting events, happy hours, there's going and painting. There's all different things you can do. Nobody's going to like everything, but if you have a variety, everybody's going to feel happy at some point and feel included.
We have a last question. I think I see one right here.
Hi. So as students and also frequently as interns, we're frequently given problems and told to solve them. But Stephanie, you had mentioned you went from a job that told you problems to having to find the problems. And I know, at least for me, that's what I'm going to start having to do when I move into my job more full time. How do you start thinking as what the problems are versus how do I solve things?
So I do think you get good at identifying the problems by at first, like, being the person handed to it. Sometimes you either start seeing patterns or like while you're implementing something, you'll stumble upon something else. And so one of the things I was taught to do, like, if you ever find yourself complaining about something, like turn that into a design doc and like say how you want to fix it and see if the work gets prioritized. The other thing is just to like learn more about whatever you're working on. So I had the benefit, Google had just released the SRE book. And I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it the whole way. I like read the book, and that actually gave me a great framework for like looking at services and understanding how to do things. So if you do feel like you're having trouble like making that next step, like that is a good thing to ask for resources and ask for help, because it is something your manager should be working with you on, or a mentor, things like that for skill building. So part of it does come with experience, but if you ever feel like you're stuck, that is a good thing to ask for help for.
So I have one last question. So after this, we're going to have some time for networking. And so just to give you all a jump start on it, what are 3 topics that these lovely audience members could come talk to you about afterwards?
It's tempting. I'll talk about anything if you can't figure that out. From a technical standpoint, I love talking about emerging tech, AI, virtual reality, IoT. Those are all my favorite things. Love to talk about work-life balance. I've had infants, toddlers. Now I've got tweens, which is harder than infants and toddlers. And happy to talk about the business side of technology.
I'm always happy to talk to you about breaking things to help make them better. From a technical perspective, or talking about learning new skills. Outside of work, I have a dog that I love. I will always talk to you about my dog. I play a lot of soccer, and I'm happy to talk about other things too, like mental health and things that you need to do to take care of yourself.
Technically, my current research area, genomics, bioinformatics, neuro-oncology, and out of tech, making career choice between academia or industry. Not that I have chose industry, but thinking about those, we can brainstorm together.
So make sure to go talk to them. They're here because they want to talk to you. So don't be shy. And I want to thank all of you guys for coming out and talking to us about your experiences and your jobs.